Assalamu alaikum and welcome to our channel. Please hit that subscribe button, hit the like, and share this page. Share our channel with others. Please, we want to reach 10,000 before the end of the month of Ramadan. Inshallah, the page is growing and we want to keep that momentum going. I think what will help a part of our momentum going, we have a very, very special guest with us today, someone who I have admired from a distance. He was a guest of our masjid here in Atlanta. I think the first time he was here, I actually was in another city speaking, so I missed his presentation. But most recently, in his most recent Jummah khutbah, I was present. And also, I'm just aware of his work. Our dear brother, Dr. bin Hamid Ali, Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali. He's an associate professor of Islamic law and prophetic tradition at Zaytuna College and the founding director of the Lamppost Education Initiative. He completed a BA in Shariah from the University of Al-Qarawiyyin in 2001, a master's in ethics and social theory in 2012, and a Ph.D. in cultural and historical studies in religion in 2016, both of which are from the Graduate Theological Union. At Zaytuna, he heads the honors program and teaches multiple courses, including family law, inheritance law, commercial law, Usul Al-Fiqh, and the Fundamentals of Sufism. He has published multiple books and articles, which can be found at binhamidali.com and lamppostedu.org. We do have a link in the description, so please make sure you hit the link to get the books, get the articles. He recently launched an original YouTube and Spotify podcast entitled Talking with Teachers. So also go to the Lamppost Education Initiative YouTube channel and check out Talking with Teachers. Very fascinating discussions with teachers, scholars, academics in Islamic knowledge. I'm certain that you will find it beneficial, as I have. And I was joking with the doctor, the good doctor, a little bit beforehand. In my years of study, one of the places that I ended up, praise be to Allah, was Medina Institute. And we were there in a particular year where, for some reason, most of the teachers couldn't make it. Things kept coming up. So we had a lot of Sheikh Muhammad Ninawi, and his brother too. But one of the texts that we covered was one of your books that you translated, Def Shuba, which I said the joke because I know that I don't, the print is just, I don't know if it's out of print, but the only copy you can find now, if it's not PDF, it's about $1,500 or so. Excellent in-depth study that we did. And I think that text is very useful for our context today. One of the presentations that I'm aware that you did here at the Atlanta Masjid is the Negro in Arab Muslim consciousness. I have here with me, A Return to Purity and Creed, a translation of Imam al-Ghazali's text on it's a theological text, but as I understand it, it's a caution of the general populace delving into the depths of speculative matters. Then the latest, if I'm not mistaken, this is the latest. There is no male preference in Islamic law. I really like this. I like them all, but this one is good for the modern ethos. So, Sheikh, welcome. It's good to have you with us.
No, alhamdulillah. It's really a pleasure to be here, to be a guest, Imam Rashad. I really do appreciate it. And I also would say that although I haven't read, I'm not read, but rather I haven't watched, of course, the long versions of your videos, but a lot of the clips have been in circulation, and some friends of mine, they've sent me some of them, so you have a lot of admirers, around the world, around the country as well. So, and I really do appreciate your ability to articulate a very clear and simple sort of message of Islam or whatever the issue is that you dealt with, So I really do hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He blesses your channel to grow, and and people get a very good sort of overview of what Islamic teachings are, inshallah.
Yes, sir. Yes, indeed. I mean, and I really appreciate that. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you on is because we focus on this at the masjid here in Atlanta, and it's one of the things that we focus on the channel. I'm personally just aware of the trajectory of African Americans in Islam, from what they would call the proto-Islamic movement days to where we are today. And I really see persons such as yourself not only acquiring Islamic knowledge, but also, I mean, you're a professor at Zaytuna, associate professor at Zaytuna College, which is really the first accredited Islamic institution, Islamic studies institution,
Right.
this is historical.
Yeah.
And you're translating texts. So I really wanted to get your perspective on a topic that we discuss on this channel. One of the things we discuss on this channel, which is really the state of Islam today and in the future of Black America. Obviously, Islam is a global phenomenon. It's not restricted to any one race or group, but
Right.
just looking at where we are. And I know you, having benefited from studying with some of the top minds in Islam and the work that you do today, I know that your perspective will be of immense benefit to our audience. But before even getting into that, a little bit about your history as an African American, originally from Philadelphia, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
What was your journey? How did you get from there to here?
Yeah. Bismillah. I was born in Philadelphia, but then not long after I was born, my family moved to Chicago. So the first almost 12 years of my life were spent in Chicago.
Okay.
And then we moved back to Philadelphia after that. My parents were converts from Christianity into the Nation of Islam. They were following what we call the First Resurrection with Elijah Muhammad. And when he passed away, they also followed Imam W.D. Muhammad, rahimahullah. Besides that, I really couldn't say that I really had a full indoctrination into what one time was called sort of like the American Muslim Mission and things like that, and so in the teachings of Imam W.D. Muhammad, because my father, by the time the transition happened, inside the home, the only person who was in the home who actually was praying was my father. He was the only one who made salat, and he didn't impose anything upon us as children, at least after the death of Elijah Muhammad. My older siblings, I think that they did get some level of indoctrination into it. They used to go to the temple on, especially on Fridays and things like that. And my father was very serious about that. I remember those days, that he was very serious about making sure that my eldest brother, especially, that he would go there, even to the point of becoming physically.
That sounds like a Black Muslim dad.
So if you don't come, then So we grew up as, I guess I like to tell people, we grew up more as like cultural Muslims, in the sense that we knew Assalamu alaikum. We weren't taught to pray. We weren't, compelled to do so. We were actually pretty much like almost any other American child, growing up in the cultural, events, the holidays, and Christmas, Easter, we do some of those things, and we watch the specials of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty the Snowman, and we would travel to Philadelphia every year around Christmas time because my aunt, my father's sister, that she was very wealthy, so she would she would buy gifts for everybody in the family every single year, so we would go there to Philly, and then most of my family actually is in Philly. I do still have some family in Chicago. Then I have some family in Atlanta too. But most of them are in Philadelphia. And so basically what happened is that as we got older, eventually my mom and dad, they got divorced. And, I was a break dancer when we moved prior to even leaving Chicago. I was a break dancer, moved to Philly, I was also still doing my break dancing thing. Then eventually that transitioned into rap music, but I remember when I was during my break dance days, I was traveling around with some of my crew, and we would go and we would challenge people, let's battle, right? We go around the neighborhood and just battle, So one particular day, we stopped at this one house with these guys, and so we challenged them to a battle. So the mother of that particular house, Sister Halima, rahimahullah, she actually found out that I was Muslim, right? So she invited me in. Right? So even though I was with the other guys, she invited me in the house, so I went inside, and I saw them making salat. So my father, of course, he was no longer in the house with us, and he was taking care of my grandmother, who also was Muslim, and And I was like, oh, really intrigued. I said, okay, I used to see my dad do that. And my dad used to do that all the time, So it's developed in this sort of an interest in me coming to their home, which they lived just right around the corner from us. Right? Anyway, so I started to come there and I started to learn the basics of Islam. Me, my two younger sisters as well. And actually my brother was right above me, who passed away back in 2020, rahimahullah. And so it sort of started there, and I guess I was around like 13, 14 years old, and so started to learn the basics, wudu, salat, those type of things, and then eventually I saw a Quran, right? So my entire life up to that point, I'd never seen an actual Quran. When I first saw the Arabic, I was just like, whoa, that's really amazing. I mean, does it actually say something? And so I wanted to know, like, what did it actually say? So I guess if I remember correctly, what happened was when I was about 16 or 17, I started to try to teach myself Arabic on my own. I found this book called Easy Tajweed. You're probably familiar with it as well. And in the beginning of the book, at the start, they had like a list of the Arabic alphabet, So I said, okay, well, maybe I'll get a notebook and I'll just start to write. I'll just write the letters 15 times and each, and I'll try to memorize them. So, and I started there. So within about a week, someone came to me and said, hey, you know what? At Sister Clara Muhammad School, there's actually an Arabic teacher, from Eritrea. Right? His name is Imam Barra. So he's offering Arabic classes there. So right after I started, about a week later, I found a teacher.
Wow.
Right? So I was studying with him for about like 2 days a week, studied with him. And that went on for about a year, so until we reached a point where, because his English wasn't very good, and my Arabic wasn't strong enough by then, that we reached a point where we met sort of like an impasse. We sort of had an impasse. And around that same time, across the street from the Sister Clara Muhammad School in Philadelphia is the Quba Institute, which at that time was called the International Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay.
And then it changed after Imam Anwar, rahimahullah, had become the Imam. His father stepped down and it turned things over to him. So he said, we're no longer the International Muslim Brotherhood. We now call the Quba Institute. And they started a new Arabic program. Right. So I said, oh, here we go. So Americans who actually spent, a lot of, a number of years in Saudi Arabia studying, now they're home, they're hafadh al-Quran. And, mashallah, so I'm just going to go there and start studying with them, So I started with them. But prior to going to study with them, I had already been teaching myself or memorizing Quran, right? So I've been memorizing Quran on my own. I actually already knew about 2/30 of the Quran before I studied, 2/30, right? Not 2/3, but 2/30 of the Quran, before I studied with them. But I didn't know Tajweed that well. I actually would listen to Manshawi or Husari and try to recite with them. And so that would help me to understand Arabic better. And as you know, back then they didn't have a lot of like these, really didn't have any of these Arabic intensive programs or anything like that, So a lot of the people from that time, they just really had to find it wherever they could. So every time I would hear about Arabic or something else being taught somewhere, I just would avail myself of it. There was a brother from Philly. His name is Abdul-Hakim Muhammad. He also studied at University of Pennsylvania, like Dr. Jackson did. And he was teaching the red book we call the English elementary Arabic, elementary modern standard Arabic, which they used to call the CIA book back there. So I started to study that with him at the same time as I was studying at Cuba. And then eventually we heard about an institute in Virginia, which had opened up Ma'had al-Ulum al-Islamiyya al-Arabiyya fi America, the Institute of the, Islamic and Arabic Sciences in America. It was run by the Saudis, and this is all before 9/11. So me and a group of brothers, we used to usually go down there on the weekends in the summer. Every single summer, we would drive down there and just try to avail ourselves of their teachers. So there were teachers from Syria, teachers from Egypt, teachers from Saudi Arabia. So we anything that I could, and then just spending a lot of time at home in my room, waking up in the early morning, marrying myself to my dictionary over. So in other words, so this is with regard to Arabic studies with Sheikh Anwar and his brother Anas Mohamed. I studied also. I increased my, memorization of the Quran. The study of Tajweed. Also was introduced to a number of the Islamic sciences with them. And also prior to that, I actually studied with their father too, Sheikh Nafi, rahimahullah. That's when I was about maybe 15. And so kind of taking this back a little bit, I sort of forgot about that particular part of it, but that was for him was more like general Islamic studies. So I spent a little bit of time studying with him before I started studying with his sons.
Yes.
And so eventually what happened was around 1993, I made Hajj. And when I came back, I just had this interest in traveling. I wanted to go. It was the very first time I was on an airplane, first time I was outside of the country. And I was actually the youngest guy in the group. And wow. Back then, they didn't have Hajj groups yet. So there were no Hajj pros, right? There you got, Imam, right? So they didn't have any of that back then, but they're just individual efforts. And so I was the youngest one. So when I came back, I really was inspired to sort of travel around a bit. And then people started to encourage me to go overseas to study. I really wasn't interested myself. I just developed a knack for Arabic, and I just really liked, just opening up the tafsir book and just trying to work through it. And I was working security at the time. And, but people kept telling me, you should go overseas, So eventually I said, okay, well, all right. Okay, I'll go overseas. If you want to go overseas, where should I go? So some people said, okay, you should go to Saudi Arabia, right? Go to University of Medina. I said, okay, all right, let's make it happen. Go to University of Medina. Then a week would go by, and then they'd say, oh no, University of Medina is probably not the best place to go. They're too rigid, too close-minded. You should go to Egypt. Try to go to Azhar. So I said, okay, let's go to Azhar. And then next week they changed back to University of Medina. They back and forth until eventually a group of brothers who I knew who are, they were part of the conversation, but they weren't related to the other group. Yes. These are all my elders. They actually went and bought me like a one-way ticket to Egypt. Right. So I actually wasn't accepted into Azhar at all. My plan was I'm going to get on I'm going to get on a plane. I'm going to go to Egypt. I'm going to tell the taxi cab driver to take me to Azhar University. I'm going to go there. I'm going to knock on the door and say, I'm here to study. That was my plan. So all the way up until the day I was supposed to leave. And then someone came to my home, and he took me outside, and he begged me not to go. He said, don't go. You don't have any support. You're going to starve. And I was like, listen, I depend on Allah. I'm going to go study. Allah's going to provide, But, after about an hour of pleading with me, I finally caved in, and I decided, okay, I'm not going to go. Now that experience left me somewhat bitter, because I felt, okay, well, it was always your guys. It was your idea. It wasn't my idea to begin with. Right? You wanted me to go overseas. I didn't want to go overseas, but now you tell me not to go. So I went after that, and I registered in Temple University, and I decided that, well, I'm going to just, get me a good job, get married, make some money, and that's it. So I actually was majoring in computer science, right? So that's so computer science. Very first year, I was very focused. But then in the second year, the start of the second year, I discovered the Arabic section of the library. So started looking through these books, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't know this book exists, this book, and so I started to spend a lot more time doing that than actually studying. So I started to fall behind in my computer science studies. And then I also had met Dr. Khalid Blankenship, who teaches there. He still teaches there now today, and developed a relationship with him. And we used to study privately in his office certain books, and then I took a couple of his courses as well, his graduate courses where we were during that time. And then one day after work, I came to him and I told him, I said, you know what, Dr. Khalid, I think it's time for me to actually leave. And actually, this is something that I think Allah wants me to do. It comes easy for me, but I don't know where to go. Right. So Dr. Khalid said to me, well, we don't know anybody who studied Al-Qarawiyyin, so maybe you should go there, right? So I said, well, how am I going to go there, Dr. Khalid? So he says, well, I've been there before, and the number of the people there know me. So he wrote me a letter of recommendation in Arabic. So I traveled to Morocco in the summer of 1997. I visited the ministries, like Ministry of Islamic Affairs. I visited the sort of the we call the Katib al-Am, the general secretary, his office. I delivered the letter to him that Khalid wrote. They told me, okay, come back in September, no problem, right? So, and that's just how that came about. Of course, I don't want to go on for too long. There's a lot of details. I'm going to try to skip as many details as possible to make this a bit interesting. But, I started there in 1997, finished in 2001. I came home. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was offered to teach at Quba Institute. Sheikh Anwar, he offered me a job there. I taught there for 1 year, third grade all the way up to high school, right?
Wow.
And then towards the end of that year, someone told me about a position that had opened up in the state institute, state prison of Chester, Pennsylvania. They said that they needed an imam there. I wasn't really interested at first. They gave me the application. I took it. I sat on it for a couple of weeks. Okay, no problem. Let me fill it out. I sent it back in.
Yeah.
But then after a while, I started to develop an interest. I said, actually, maybe I do. Actually, I think I might want to do this, right? So I went and interviewed, and they liked me, and then they said, "Hey, well, you're our guy. You're the guy." So I became the imam, or we call it the chaplain, the Muslim chaplain there, full time for 5 years, and then my 5th year at that institution, I started to develop a certain degree of boredom because I guess there wasn't much of a challenge anymore, and then most of the challenges I had at the time were actually from administration. It started off as challenges from some of the brothers in the prison, because most of the brothers identify with being Salafis, so I was clashed with them quite a bit, but we kind of met. We learned to kind of work things out a bit, so I had less resistance towards the end of my tenure there, and then I started to look overseas again. And I said, well, maybe I should go overseas. And so I called Dr. Jackson because I saw that he was on the Qatar Foundation's their board. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, oh, Dr. Jackson, what do you think about this? I'm thinking about maybe trying to apply for one of these positions, the Qatar Foundation. So he responded like a few days later, but before he responded, I received an email from Imam Zayd. Imam Zayd sent me an email, says, hey, Zaytuna College is, we're looking to start a college. Well, Zaytuna Institute at the time, we're looking to start a college, and we're looking for people who, who have some type of credentials. And, we're hoping that you'll be willing to come on, right? To move to California and help us within our project. And, with the plans to return to the East Coast in a couple of years, right? That's how he sold it to me, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I wasn't interested in moving to California at the time, but he sold it. That's okay. If it's just a couple of years, no problem. I can do that, but it became permanent after that. So I've been here since then. So 2007, I've been here in California. I was, of course, played a somewhat of a marginal role, I guess I would say, in the development of some of the curriculum and some of the, things like that for the college. And so basically, during the summer of 2008 was when they decided that they were going to graduate the seminary students who had already been there for 5 years. So when I came, I was teaching them. We had 5 seminary students of the pilot program.
Okay.
And they decided that, okay, it was now time to actually let them go so we can focus full time on Zaytuna College. So I remember having the conversation with Sheikh Hamza about this because it meant that I wouldn't be doing anything for like a whole year, So I said, well, I'm going to be here and I'm going to get paid for doing nothing. So, and I said to Sheikh Hamza, are you really sure? I mean, and so I decided, well, okay, since I'm here, I might as well go back to school. So I actually applied for UC Berkeley, but I made a mistake on my application, right? So I didn't get into UC Berkeley. But then I also applied for the Graduate Theological Union, and I really didn't know what I wanted to study. I just picked up the course catalog and looked through what they had offered, and then I came up and my eyes fell on ethics and social theory. Yeah. So I said, okay, I mean, that sounds interesting. Let's try that. So, so I signed up for that. I finished my MA, and they also offered me I forgot what the type of scholarship they called it, but it was a scholarship they offered me for the Ph.D. program. So I said, okay, well, I just finished the MA. They offered me free tuition for the PhD, so I might as well just do my PhD as well, right?
Yeah.
So the presidential scholarship, that's what they call it, the presidential scholarship, right? So yeah, so because I finished my MA with honors, so they decided, okay, well, we'll give you a free sort of like ride for the PhD program, and so I got my PhD in culture and historical studies in religion, and that's how. Pretty much those things came about. So sorry if I went on for too long.
No, man, that was really, really good. I know you skipped over a lot because I said to myself, when you said Imam Zayd called you, I said, well, by that time you obviously had built up a reputation for yourself.
Yes,
as
right.
a teacher. Yeah. So I mean, this is really excellent. You mentioned something that I really want to circle to. One of our more trending videos now is we're speaking about Black Americans becoming Muslim. And at the outset of that particular video, I referenced a delegation that we took, myself along with several other imams in the community of Imam Muhammad. We were the guests of the Kingdom of Morocco. And we met the Minister of Endowments, and we went to Qarawiyyin. I forget the sheikh's name, but his family has been there for hundreds of years. We met everybody. Imam Hamza Abdul Malik was a part of our
yes, of course, yeah.
So it was several of us, Imam Suleiman, Imam Safir. But the short end of it is they were impressing upon us, our hosts, that they see the future of Islam in, they were saying Africa and amongst African Americans. This is what they were saying. We didn't, we were guests. So they basically were making these offers to sum it up very briefly. How can we help you all? Do you all need teachers? Do you all need this? This is what we offer. In terms of the trip, I think we had so much, sort of as a personal reflection, we had so much amongst us as delegation members. We didn't have an organized plan. We didn't know that that's what they were inviting us for, to be perfectly honest. So it was a unique experience, to say the least. We're actually going to be back. I'm leaving, inshallah. We'll be leaving for another delegation this Saturday. But I'm saying that because you mentioned your studies there, and it really brought that back to my mind. But that particular topic. So even what you referenced about in the beginning, not a lot was available. You were trying to learn the Arabic. Times have changed. Everyone has an intensive now. Everybody's grandmother and auntie has an intensive. So we see Islamic knowledge growing. We see the interest growing. From your perspective, looking at how things were to where they are now in one reference, and then at the same time, really, if I'm hearing you correctly, which I didn't know, you seem to have. It seems that you were a part of the founding of the construction of Zaytuna College. What do you project? Let's start with just Islam in general in America. Where do you see things headed?
Islam in general?
Yeah, in general. First.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. It's a very good question. I mean, at the moment, we try to be hopeful, right, about the future. Naturally, as Muslims, we're not allowed to despair, right? We shouldn't despair in anything, but I think we have an overall crisis of leadership, right? Nationally, right, in America, right, and that itself, it transcends race, right? It's sort of, it doesn't matter what race that we're talking about. As Muslims have become more political, the less value has been placed on the religion, and more importantly, less value has been placed on the importance of actually being a representative of the religion as an individual who has an obligation to bring light to society. I remember years ago when I was working in the prison, a friend of mine turned up in the prison himself. He was an inmate, and we grew up together. He wasn't Muslim when we were younger, but alhamdulillah, he became Muslim in the prison. And I remember one time he came to my office and he said to me, he said, "Listen, these guys are driving me crazy, and these are like the Salafi brothers, they drive me crazy." I said, "Listen, when I became Muslim because I wanted discipline, and I don't really feel like I'm getting discipline, right?"
Yeah.
And that was really interesting, right? To hear that from him. And that's what it was for us when we were younger. I remember in Philly, there was a time when I grew up, you would never see a Muslim publicly smoking cigarettes.
Yeah.
You wouldn't hear anything about a Muslim sister with a non-Muslim boyfriend or any boyfriend at all, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Right. Those are things that people would hide from the public. Right.
Right.
But things have gotten so bad that, it's all everything's out in the open right now. That there's not the level of shame has sort of been drained, I guess, out of people, I guess you would say. And so if Muslims themselves, or as long as Muslims continue to see themselves as the same as everyone else,
right,
as people who don't have some type of mandate, right? I mean, it's a blessing to be Muslim, right? But it's also responsibility, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the Quran, and the primary message of the Quran is the invitation to God.
Yeah.
Right. And so it seems to me that most, if not all, Muslim organizations nationally, they don't place that front and center, that is something which is secondary, and I can kind of understand it because of what happened after 9/11.
I was going to ask you, did 9/11 have something to play? Did it play a part in that?
Yeah, I think it played a major part in that, because prior to 9/11, there were significant number of voices that were basically talking about just how Islam is going to save the planet, how Islam is the solution, right? Yeah, Islam is the solution, etc. Right?
Yeah.
Even so much to the extent that many of them were not even inclined towards even saying things like, okay, America is a legitimate country. Say, well, why is America not a legitimate country? Because it doesn't rule by, sacred law, right? It rules by man-made law, right? Now, this was really popular, right, among Muslims prior to 9/11. And again, I'm not saying that that's the thing we need to shift back to completely, right?
Right.
But we went to a different extreme, right? We went to a different extreme after 9/11, where the religious aspects or our doctrine started to be downplayed and marginalized, right? And culture had been started to be replaced with that. Is that Islamic culture, a Muslim culture, is what means more than anything else, right? And I think that's been very damaging, right? And it led to the reinforcement of a type of inferiority complex. And it's really interesting. I think one thing I was thinking about before we even started today is that I wanted to even talk about, like, for instance, the Black American Muslim Conference, right? So I used to, like I said, used to organize this conference. We did about maybe 3 of them. I think there were 2 in person and 1 was online once COVID started, right? And the original vision, the original reason why I actually wanted to organize that particular conference was not so much to try to make it an exclusively Black sort of like conference. Of course, the whole Black focus was about, okay, this is sort of bait and switch. I want to reel people in, because I wanted my own people, more African Americans, to actually be there than non-African Americans, but everyone's welcome. But the whole idea was that I wasn't pleased, and a lot of us were not pleased with the direction with sort of like the immigrant community was going in, right? With their focus on politics, and then sort of the progressive stuff that was being promoted, and normalization of like immoral sexual behavior, or at least the tolerance of it, and the lack of outcry about it, right? Which was really been led by, because sort of like the immigrant community. And I said to myself, you know what? I mean, African Americans have a unique history. We have unique experience here. We have a unique voice, and we don't suffer from the same level of inferiority, or white inferiority, right? So in the sense that, okay, well, we don't see ourselves as unauthentic Americans. We are just as authentic as white Americans. And I believe that particular perspective, that voice, needs to be preserved and projected in order to save the community, right? And so the idea was that, okay, bring together a number of voices, African American voices from around the country, some who even may ideologically not see eye to eye, right? and put them on a stage, let the audience observe them even clash, but clash in a very civil manner to teach us that it's possible for us to work together despite the fact that we have different viewpoints on a lot of things, right? And that was, again, that was my original vision of that whole thing. And of course, I mean, it fell apart, and perhaps it had something to do with me not being able to effectively articulate that vision, but I don't blame myself. Of course, if someone can sort of show me like where it was my fault, right? But I sort of felt like that our community still wasn't mature enough, right, as African Americans to really see, the importance and the role that we could play in the future of Islam, the future of just general virtue in American society. And if we help change the culture of America, then you're going to change the culture in other places as well, because everybody follows America. And of course, I mean, Dr. Jackson articulates this in a lot of different ways, through his works. But yeah, that was, really like my main concern. Like, so, but unfortunately right now, what I see happening is that there's somewhat of like an effort to, how to put it, to erase, I guess you'd say, to erase the black experience, right? It's like, and we're complicit in it. African American Muslims are complicit in this, in that so many of us, we cater to, I guess you would say, like immigrant perspectives or progressive sort of like ideas, right? Knowingly and unknowingly at times as well. So there's somewhat like a psychological erasure, right? In other words, to say that, that Black Americans are no longer sort of like the antithesis of white American, right? So now we have this new group called people of color, right? Right. So it's like, okay, yeah, but for a group of people who are very concerned about binaries, or in other words, concerned about not trying to promote binaries, that in itself is one of the most detrimental binaries that we've embraced. This idea that, again, you have white people and then you have everybody else, right?
Yeah, people of color,
right. And we're just one among the groups of minorities, right? In other words, no distinction between the Caribbean Black, between the African Black from the African continent, no distinction between us and the Asian. I mean, whether they're from India or from Pakistan, except you get the point, So all these people, they're like people of color, So it's a psychological erasure happening. But then there's also this like a political erasure happening, in the sense that the Democrat Party is importing all of these illegal immigrants into the country. Like, so right now, I mean, African American used to be the largest minority political bloc in the country, but now it's the Hispanics, right? And many of those people who have been allowed into the country illegally, when interviewed, you can find videos of they've been interviewed and they ask, okay, well, if you're allowed to vote in the upcoming elections, who are you going to vote for? They're going to say, oh, we're going to vote for Biden, right? And it makes sense, vote for Biden gives them American citizenship, So the idea seems to be that, okay, we see that a lot of African Americans have been sort of, changing or becoming more critical of the Democrat Party, and they're deciding, okay, well, I don't have a problem with voting, for Trump or voting for the Republican Party or any other party for that matter. And they say, okay, no problem. You guys are going to leave us? Okay, we're going to bring in some other people. And it seems that that's what partially the plan is okay, we have a new voting bloc. When they import them into the country, where have they been sending these people? They've been sending them to the inner cities. They've been sending them to Chicago. They've been sending them to New York, right? Yeah. So it's like, well, why don't you send them to the rich neighborhoods, right? Why are you sending them to the poor neighborhoods, you understand? So so there's this big major erasure happening. And I just think that by not taking notice of it and not saying more about it on a more consistent basis, that we are undermining our own voices in the process of that, right? And again, it's not to say that this is really just a racial thing, right? Of course, there's a racial element, but it's not about race. It's about, okay, we are concerned with the overall, betterment of society, right? And I think that the direction and the focus of the immigrants, of course, some of them take offense to that being called that, but we know what we're talking about. The immigrant community overall, their focus has not helped, right? Has not helped, and it comes off as an extreme abandonment of the Islamic message, in my viewpoint. And I think as long as African Americans are not trying to distinguish themselves, not necessarily as African Americans, but as Muslims, they say, "Listen, I'm a Muslim. And Islam means more to me than anything else." Or rather, we say, even if we don't use the word Islam, I believe that a Muslim makes society better, right? Right. And so anything that's going to help make society better, that's what I stand for.
Yeah.
Right. And Islam is a force of good. Islam is something that helps to make society better. And I just think that we should not be cowardly about expressing and articulating that type of message.
That's extremely there's a lot there in what you said, because you can see this. I mean, they even put it in movies and things like that. When things become more political,
yes,
there's an economic factor, and it tends to corrode the moral fiber of an effort.
Yeah.
And to your point, as Muslims, we do have, I mean, even when you first mentioned temple, my mind went to Ismail Faruqi. He taught about, the raison d'etre of Islam, and, the classic book Tawheed, but that's a thing that I think, especially, I mean, I grew up same. I'm born and raised in Chicago. My parents were in the Nation of Islam. They made the transition under Imam Muhammad. And as we grew up, it was distinct. You are a Muslim. You're not like them. You're not like the rest of them. And you're black, but your job is to call. And that's a carryover from the nation. The duty of the civilized is to teach the uncivilized.
Right.
So that mindset. I have often reflected on African Americans. Have we lost direction in terms of why are we Muslim in the first place? Right. I'm guessing there can be a broad. We all have our individual stories, but I like to look at things in sort of this broad brush. You can write a movie about it almost. And I see just a trajectory of us as a people being taken away from West Africa, which we had large Muslim populations, and now we are returning. And I think that a part of that trajectory is a sense of self-determination. But like you said, it's not like we're a black Islam. We're just really Muslim.
Right. Yeah, right. Exactly. We're really Muslim. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, because we're not trying to be in the big house. We know what that experience is about.
Right. Right.
We just always wanted our own house anyway.
Right.
So what do you think? What are we missing? What do we need from your perspective as African American Muslims to really continue in a direction that gives us strength, gives us a sense of integrity as a people, yet we're able to make a contribution to the betterment of the place, this land that we live in?
Yeah, I used to say, I was interviewed some years ago by some brothers, some Pakistani brothers, and they brought up Minister Louis Farrakhan, and I stated that my belief was that if Louis Farrakhan passes away, and he's pretty old now, right? He's getting up there, right? But alhamdulillah, he's, his health still seems to be, supporting him, right? Which you never know how long he can live. But I feel like, if he were to pass away, then the Black church and a lot of others, right, in the Black community would turn on the Muslims. At least that's my belief.
Thought of that.
Yeah, because I feel like Farrakhan is like a buffer between us and a lot of Black America. That Farrakhan is looked upon as probably the only legitimate Black leader among all Blacks. right? And the reason I bring him up is that I think what's happened with people who don't follow fair count, who happen to be Muslims, who are actually associated with Islam, is that our way of engagement with non-Muslim blacks is either antagonistic in nature. Of course, we want to, argue about the Bible, and it's fine, to have a debate, but it's like just the way we do it, maybe may do it. Sometimes is that, or it's okay. Who cares? About you guys. I think that quite often when things happen, like George Floyd or these type of movements, of course, Muslims, we jump on the bandwagon. Black Muslims jump on the bandwagon like everyone else. And a lot of the non-Black Muslims think that, okay, we really get the pulse of the Black community. I don't believe we do have the actual pulse, or rather, we might have the pulse, but we may not have the respect. I don't believe we have the respect, right, of the Black community like Muslims in the past actually did have.
Yeah.
Right. And some of that has to do with the fact that we do have a lot of bad Muslims, right? So, a lot of women who are like, okay, well, they're Muslim brothers who sleep around, right? They're Muslim brothers. As a matter of fact, when I was working in the prison, I remember the young brother, he comes to me, he was raised Muslim. And he told me, he said that in Philadelphia, the Muslims, they run the drug trade.
Yeah.
Right. And so he said to me, a guy stand out in the corner, and then somebody will walk up to him and say, hey, man, you got Shahada, right?
Wow.
That's what they're going around saying to each other. They say, you got Shahada? So you have a lot of that happening, so in that sense, it undermines the moral force of Islam, right? Because people say, okay, well, you're supposed to be Muslim. I know a whole lot of bad Muslims. A lot of Black people can say that, you see. So it's not as if, like, if Black people speak up, or rather Black Muslims actually say something about a social issue, a political issue, that we have them actually listening to us and actually taking us seriously most of the time. I don't really think that they seriously do most of the time. The other thing that we may do is that we may accommodate them, right? And I think that the accommodation of moral decadence is a bad thing too, right? In other words, we'll say, okay, well, we're all Black and we have to support Black people, regardless of what condition they're in, right? With promiscuity. I'm not saying that we're promoting promiscuity, but it's like, we don't tell them, like, that's actually not a good thing, that you probably should get married. It's not a good thing for you to do drugs. It's not good for you to call women names and for you to rap like that and, use those type of things in a song to glorify this type of culture. Where is that happening? Right? I haven't seen many Sunni Muslims, especially, sort of trying to, I could say, or at least, taking the step of trying to challenge our own people on those things and at least encouraging them to actually to do better. Now, one thing that's really strange, I think, is that, and this is based upon a conversation I had with an imam, or a person on a lecture circuit. He's African-American brother, but we had this sort of debate one time. He came to my house and his understanding, his belief is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always be with Black people. In other words, regardless of, we're the oppressed, because Allah is with the oppressed, that Allah is on their side of the oppressed. And for that reason, as Muslims, we have an obligation to be with Black people and to be in solidarity with Black people anytime their issues come up. It can be, sort of like white on Black shooting, police officer shooting. It can be, you understand what I'm saying, is that we just have to be with them, right? And that itself feeds into this attitude, in my opinion, that, okay, we have to tolerate and just not say anything, not to object to what they're doing. We always have to explain it as, oh, these are just simply the consequences of slavery, post-slavery, slavery, And I said, well, no, I don't think that that's a legitimate argument to make.
Right.
So, but basically, my argument back was that no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He doesn't remain with the people, the ancestors of the oppressed, if the ancestors of the oppressed are not turning to God. You understand? So you don't get a blank check simply because your ancestors were oppressed.
Right.
Now, you're in the know now, that you're aware of things. You're aware of the history. You have opportunity now to do better. Right. But you choose not to.
Right.
Right. So you're not going to tell me that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with that type of person, a person who intentionally and knowingly turns away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person who wants to be involved in moral decadence and knowingly, they know that that's what it is. I mean, a lot of people actually don't know. I remember this is a friend of mine, his brother Nafis. He's probably going to like the fact that I mentioned him in this video. Brother Nafis Bowie. He's an older brother, about 10 years older than me. He's bus driver in Philadelphia. But I remember some years ago, we were walking around West Philadelphia, and he and I and maybe a couple other people, and we came upon this group of young brothers, young guys, not brothers, but young guys, black African Americans who were standing on the corner. They weren't selling drugs or anything like that, but they were just there. So Nafis walked by and said, "Hey, say you guys Christians? Are you guys Christians?" And they were like, "Yeah, we Christians." So he said to them, he said, "How many of y'all know what fornication is?" And so they say, "Oh yeah, fornication. We know what fornication is." Then he went further and said to them, "How many of you guys know that it's a sin in Christianity for you to commit fornication?" And it was really surprising to me that those guys didn't even know that fornication was wrong. Right? And so it's to his credit, may Allah preserve him, bless him for that. But there was a time when, of course, the Nation of Islam used to do things like that. The members of the Nation of Islam, especially during the first resurrection, should do those type of things, and they would go directly and confront our own people and say, "Hey, that God is on your side when you clean yourself up, not when you choose to do the wrong thing and do the thing that the devil tells you to do. Right? If you're going to obey the devil, God is not going to be on your side.
Right?
That you understand? So God is going to be on your side once you are making an effort to do better. So."
I really like that. I was thinking as you were talking, I was thinking about I was reading a commentary on the Exodus, and the rabbi was making the point of how remembrance is a huge theme in the books of Moses. Because of this tendency of the children of Israel to just forget and to lapse back into whatever they were into. And I know that sort of a hallmark of African American religious thought is to compare ourselves to the children of Israel.
Right.
And I often tell people, we forget, we remember when Moses was drowned when we talk about that. Not Moses, pardon me, Pharaoh. We remember when Musa parted the seas and Pharaoh, he was drowned, Pharaoh was drowned. But we forget all of the trouble that they gave Moses.
That's right. After you got the salvation, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So, I think that, I mean, you hit it on the head regarding, I'll use the word in a generic sense. Well, it's not even, we're not really doing it. It seems as though in the older time when we didn't have the correct belief, we did have dawah.
Yes, right.
That was perhaps more correct than what our dawah is today.
Right.
How would you? Well, let me ask you from this angle. What do you think? What would be the practical steps to change this, to alter this? I'm not. I think I got a few years younger than you. I'm guessing, but I have connection with some young men that have, a decade or two underneath me. And a lot of them are hungry in the sense that they grow up hearing the stories about, the history of Islam in America when it first came to us, and they want to do something. What would you suggest? Well, what would you suggest to be the appropriate method to go about changing things?
Well, I think the first concern has to be with the youth, right? In other words, we have to find a way to make the youth believe or feel that they have a stake in the game. That they themselves, that they have some ownership over what happens in the Muslim community, in the masajid, etc. That make them feel that that they are part of the leadership or part of like the process of actually trying to create or build a healthy institution, right? Because when we look at the masajid, I think that the greatest litmus test of whether or not we're going to have an Islam in the future is how many young people are there in the masjid. And by young people, I don't mean people in their 50s and 40s and 30s, right? I'm talking about 20s, teenagers. How many of those young people actually do we have in the masjid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I know the feeling. I grew up in the masjid, and I was just one of the minority of people my age who actually spent a lot of time in the masjid growing up.
Yeah.
But I do not. A lot of my peers, they were doing a lot of other things, right? Girlfriends, everybody's getting high. I mean, I had my time, as well when I was a lot younger, right? But you come to the masjid and the people who work there, they don't want to give any chores to the youth because they're afraid they're going to mess things up.
Right.
And I'm like, well, okay, well, you haven't really done that good of a job yourself. I mean, people gave you an opportunity to mess things up, so why can't you give them an opportunity to mess things up? There's a possibility they may do better than you did. Right?
Yeah.
When you look at the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you see that he appointed many people young people to like important positions. Zayd bin Thabit was 11 years old when the Prophet came to Medina, and the Prophet employed him as a scribe.
Right.
He was writing down the revelation that he was literate. He told him to go learn multiple languages.
Yeah.
When the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam died and Abu Bakr became the Khalifa, Abu Bakr put him in charge of along with Umar ibn Khattab, of the campaign to gather together the loose pages of the Quran itself. So he's like 20 years old, 21, 22 years old.
That's huge.
Right. You find that when the Prophet, after he conquered Mecca, he left in charge when he turned his eyes on the Hawazin. He left in charge a young man by the name of Attab ibn Asid. He was about 19 years old. He's in charge. He's like the governor or the mayor of Mecca, right? So he's like, Attab, you're in charge. Usama ibn Zayd, he put Usama ibn Zayd over the army, right? And he was about 18 years old, right? So the Prophet ﷺ was giving these major responsibilities to young people. And of course, that's not to say, okay, the condition shouldn't simply be that they're young. Of course, we want to, look for those who are precocious as well.
Yes.
But again, it's that I think that's the first thing. The first challenge is that how do we get the youth in the masajid? How do we get the youth to delve into a deep study of Islam, get them connected to the Quran, to give them an Islamic, a Quranic vision, right, for humanity, right? I think that's the first step. Then of course the second thing is once you well, maybe not the second thing, but along with that, eventually what we'd have to do is go out to the public, right? Maybe it's to start as Allah told the Prophet to warn your nearest of kin, right? We all have non-Muslim family members. Maybe we have to return back to that sunnah. Those who are not Muslim in our families, everyone make it an obligation to make it their sort of make a decision, a conscious decision that, okay, well, I'm going to try my best to bring my family members into the fold. Right. But we have to understand too, in the process of doing that is going to require a great amount of patience, because there's going to be a lot of resistance. There's going to be people who don't take you seriously. There's going to be people who are going to attack you, your character, attack your beliefs, etc. So you have to arm yourselves not only with knowledge but with forbearance, with patience, and just the understanding that, okay, well, this is what happens when you call people to the truth. You try to call them to the right thing. Because if you think about, for instance, the Black community in general, we have so many problems, right? That I remember years ago, Dr. Khalid Blankenship said to me, he said that the African-American community is the vanguard community for what the rest of the world eventually is going to become.
Right.
And that itself to say that we are the worst off on the planet. This is pretty much he's implying that African Americans, at least that we call that abandoned class, right? That minorities. He's talking about 25% of our community. That's sort of like this kind of just left, and abandoned, right? He said so. He's like, well, this is what everyone else is going to become that way in the entire world eventually, right? That's his viewpoint on things. So we start talking about, childhood illegitimacy. Right. You're talking about 70% of the children born, right, are born out of wedlock, right? Which also means that they grew up without their fathers, right? Or they grew up, young lady has 4 or 5 children from 3 different guys or 4 different guys, right?
Right.
I mean, that's an unhealthy situation for a child to grow up in. You have that. I remember when I worked in the prison, there was a young brother who, when I first started there, he came and introduced himself to me. He was about maybe 25 at the time. And he told me that he had AIDS, that he had HIV. And but he talked about how when he was younger, he used to do crack with his mother.
Oh,
His
Lord.
mother would smoke crack with him. And I was like, man, it's really crazy, And he's very mature. He's very mature for his age. Right?
Yeah.
Very mature young man, But he was taking, he was on the HIV medicine and things like that. He became Muslim. He started to fast Ramadan, and during Ramadan, he became very sick. And then when they checked him out, they said, "Oh, you have HIV. That's why you're sick." Right? And he didn't even know it.
Wow.
He didn't know how he got it. Right? But it's so you have those type of things happening. So childhood legitimacy. You have issues of abortion. You're talking about about 50, almost like about 40% of all of the abortions that happen in America are Black babies.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So and since 1973, you're talking about it's like 20 million African Americans babies have been aborted since 1973. Once they introduced Roe versus Wade. And since then so it's like so your abortion rate, the issue of marriages or the lack of marriage, our numbers are low, right? It's very low numbers. The divorce rate is very high. The issue of crime or like murder, the murder rate. Because we know that most people who actually are murdered in America they're Black. Black on Black crime. That's the most the normal thing. But what's also interesting too about these type of statistics is that we focus typically on the Black numbers, but we forget too that the white numbers actually are really high too.
Yeah,
because we had the tendency to think, okay, well, that we're in a bad situation and whites are so much better off, right? But they're really suffering too because they're very high numbers as well, right, in terms of murder rate. But it's white on white murder, most of it, right? So whites and Blacks together, they're doing far worse than Hispanics and Asians, and we're doing far worse than they are, even in the prison system. So in the prison system, we have we make up about maybe like 38% of the prison system. Whites are about 57% of the prison system, and it somewhat makes sense because you think about the fact that they're a much larger number of people than we are, right? So it only makes sense that it will be more of them than there are of us, right? And I do think that one of the things that sort of keeps us back too is we're constantly comparing ourselves to white people, so we're not able to see the type of progress that we've made over the years, right? So we start talking about, okay, well, how much money white people have compared to Black people, and so we're looking at the extremes, right? Extreme poverty, extreme, affluence. And so, but in the middle, right, it's more even, right? And between the extremes, it's more even between whites and Blacks. We focus on the extremes, but if we were to compare ourselves to like, oh, okay, compared to Hispanics, where are we? Compared to the Chinese, where are we? Compared to you understand? And also the whites, compared to the Chinese, where are the whites then in terms of their salaries, their income, things like that, right? So there are these people who have manipulated a lot of us, right, into I guess you'd say permanent victim status.
Yeah.
So coming back to the issue of Black erasure, like one aspect of Black erasure also is ideological erasure or the erasure of ideological diversity. In other words, we've been told that Black people only think one way, right? As a matter of fact, famous statement from Joe Biden, his statement was that it says, it said, unlike Blacks, with notable exception, the Hispanic community is very diverse, right? So in other words, if you have trouble trying to decide whether you're for me or for Trump, then you ain't Black, right? So in other words, so we've been programmed into believing that there's only one way to be Black, right? Or that that there's only one sort of Black paradigm. But if we were to go back to, for instance, after emancipation, or even prior to emancipation, you had two basic tendencies, and this is really something that I think is good for people to look into if you read like books like by Harold Cruz, and in particular his book, The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual.
Yeah.
Like towards the beginning, he talks about Martin Delany and Frederick Douglass.
Mm-hmm.
They were very good friends. Both of them were, embraced by Lincoln. Martin Delany was like a army physician, but he also was a Black nationalist. In other words, he believed that there was no future for Blacks in America, so he believed that we should go back to Africa. Frederick Douglass, his attitude was that no, this is our home. We're staying here. We're going to fight it out. We're going to make it work, right? So we have those two paradigms from very early on.
Yeah,
very early in our history. And so even when in the 60s, you see it, integrationist Blacks like Martin Luther King, and then separatist Blacks like, of course, the Nation of Islam, and Malcolm, at least at first, right? But you can go back further than that. Booker T. Washington, he wasn't so much about leaving America, but he was a separatist. He said, listen, we're not trying to integrate with white people. Listen, he convinced white people to give him money. He said, listen, we're not trying to marry your daughters. We're not. Listen, we're trying to whip our people into shape. Right? And prove their conditions, etc. You should help us, right? Do that, and people donated, to his efforts, So we had Tuskegee University, which Tuskegee Institute originally, but then you have W.E.B. Du Bois, who has a different. He's a bit more complicated. Du Bois is because Du Bois is on one hand he was with the NAACP and he was about civil rights and trying to fight for integration and equality, but then he also was a separatist in that he actually did go back to Africa. Right?
So, let me just jump in. I really, as an African American Muslim, what do you think? And even if you have textual or Sharia based evidence to bring forth, that would help a lot, even for the audience. How should we orient ourselves towards that tradition? Because there's a tendency among some of us to totally separate ourselves from that trajectory. I keep using that word of our people trying to realize themselves. And though we know that we're Muslim now, does that necessitate we separate ourselves from that? Can we embrace that? And if so, to what degree?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I believe that we can embrace it. And that was one of the other messages that I was trying to send through the Black American Muslim Conference. The very fact that the Black American Muslim Conference, it had resistance. There are a number of non-Black Muslims who I knew who actually were offended by the fact that we call it the Black American Muslim Conference. But I tried to explain to them that, listen, this is not an exclusive sort of conference. It's not an exclusionary conference. You're welcome to attend, right? But, it's also an acknowledgement that there are some special needs that our community have, but also some special contributions that can be given to the general Muslim population, the national Muslim, play a part in the national Muslim discourse, that we want to preserve that. There's a very unique voice that we have, a unique experience. And so that's why you're welcome to come. And perhaps you're going to learn some things, right, in the process of it. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he says, "Ta'allamu min ansabikum ma tasiruna bihi arhamakum," that you should learn. You should learn enough about your blood ties, whereby you are able to connect with your relatives, right? So in other words, and it's understood to mean that there's nothing wrong with you being aware of who your ancestors are. There's so of course one of the benefits of it is that there's a certain type of solidarity and support that results from it. And this is like one of the benefits that Ibn Khaldun highlights as well, is that, one of the only benefits of actually the idea of nasab, which he considers to be a fake or an illusory issue, right? He says the idea of blood tie is really fake, right? This is Ibn Khaldun. However, he says that, the ultimate benefit of it is that it creates a type of solidarity and cohesiveness that helps to protect the collective, right? And so if there's any benefit to that knowledge, it would be that. But beyond that, it's ilmun la yanfa' wa jahalatun la tadur. It is a type of knowledge which does not benefit, nor an ignorance of which does not cause any harm. In other words, if you don't know it, there's nothing harmful. It doesn't bring you any real harm, but if you know it, there's not really any true benefit from it, just by having the knowledge of it, but for people to actually cohere and to come together and to be united upon some particular vision, that in itself is good, right? That tribalism is not all bad, right? We can see that, of course, with things that have been happening like in the world, like right now, how tribalism, is playing a major part in how it's helped certain people get all the way to the top food chain, right? But for the wrong reasons, reasons. And so there's definitely nothing wrong with identifying with your race and who you are. The Prophet ﷺ was Arab. He didn't have a problem with being called an Arab. You understand? He didn't tell us that we should transcend our races. Right? He basically just said that, that our criteria for determining true value should be based upon how pious the person is. So he revolutionized Arabia in that sense. That he says, that famous speech he gave on the Fath of Mecca, when Bilal was climbing on the top of the Kaaba, and then some of the Arabs were objecting to it, and they were making derogatory statements about his color and things like that. And then the Prophet gave the speech, "Inna Allaha qad athaba ankum ubiyata jahiliyati wa ta'adhumaha bi abaiha," that Allah, He has removed from you the vainglory of the pre-Islamic times and your magnification of your fathers. فَالنَّاسُ رَجُلَانِ. So men are of two types. رَجُلٌ بَرٌ تَقِيٌّ كَرِيمٌ عَلَى اللَّهِ. One type of person is a pious, upright individual who is valuable in the sight of God. وَفَاجِرٌ شَقِيٌّ هَيِّنٌ عَلَى اللَّهِ. And the other is a wicked, wretched person who is insignificant in Allah's eyes. Right? So he revolutionized the way that they thought of things. إِنَّمَا مُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. That only the believers are brethren. The believers, in other words, so this is an important part of that. But that in itself was not meant to say, okay, well, now you're a believer, you can no longer associate yourself with your race. And I would say the same thing about your country as well, because this is really a really important, interesting point too, is that I've done multiple posts like this, where I did one on 4th of July and I did another one recently where I basically said, okay, listen, I understand that people have a problem with America, and we all have a problem with America's foreign policy. But America is my home. Right. And I want good for my home. And I don't have a desire to make hijrah to another country, a Muslim majority country. Some people got mad at me about it when I said that, and they heard that. As a matter of fact, I saw one guy reposted and say, oh, he's a Fed. I said, I'm a Fed because I love my home, right? That I want good for America, right? So it's really, really crazy, to have people. I remember growing up that it was even considered shameful to say things like America is beautiful. Yeah. I mean, we've been programmed to hatred of our own country. And I remember like driving, I was going to New Jersey, driving on the highway, and I was just marveling just at the beauty of the landscape. Yeah. And a thought came to my mind, America is beautiful. Yeah. But then I was like, well, I can't say that. But then another voice said to me, you know what? Allah created this. Yeah. Yes, America is beautiful. Why can't I say that? It is Allah's creation. Yeah. Abdullah, right? Yeah. The land is God's land, right? The earth is God's earth, right? Why can I say the obvious, right? State the obvious about what's there, and that in itself is not an endorsement of America's foreign policy. And so it's yeah, there's so much. There's so much. I'm sorry if I'm jumping around too much.
No, man. I'm going to tell you this. I didn't know if I was going to tell you or not. I knew I was going to enjoy the conversation. I knew that, but I didn't know I was going to enjoy it this much. That's the honest truth. I'm not blowing smoke or anything. And I really I value the exchange of ideas and really, we just multiple figures in our communities. We can see them in an intellectual light. We can see them, but to get their thought, like what's the philosophy of such and such, what's the thinking, it's very enriching. And I know the audience will benefit from it. And you're kind of hitting on something. Before I go to your publications, because I do want to make sure that we touch upon at least the latest one.
Sure.
You were saying something that's connected to how I'm looking at the book. And I want to ask it this way. Do you think that where we are as Muslims in America, as African Americans, that perhaps there are some areas of discussion that need to be had from an Islamic perspective, some areas of scholarship, even reflection, that haven't necessarily been had if we look at the tradition? In other words, these new circumstances for the world, in light of the things we've been talking about here, does it require for us, while embracing the tradition, at the same time registering the need to dig deeper to find solutions to these issues, such as like the problems of Black America?
Yeah, of course. Certainly. I mean, when you study logic, one of the very first principles that you're taught is, well, it's sort of like a maxim, I guess you would say. It's sort of a maxim that's taught, which in Arabic it says, al-hukmu ala shay far'un an at-tasawwur, which fundamentally is a way of saying that any judgment that you pass about something, it follows or is subordinate to the way that you perceive of its reality. In other words, you can actually say that something's halal or haram, something's possible or impossible. But if you misapprehend things on the ground, if you misinterpret them, then that judgment ultimately is going to be wrong, is going to be incorrect, which means that there's a requirement that we utilize the objective tools that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us to first and foremost ascertain that this is actually what's happening. So, for instance, Allah has given us the 5 senses, right? You know, if I hear it, I see it, etc., I know that it happened. No. Except that in the world we have entered into now, especially if you're talking about the online world, this has become much more difficult because we have, you know, deep fakes, we have AI, we have all these things now, which, you know, as a matter of fact, sometimes some people are so good at imitating other people's voices that you're convinced, okay, that actually just did occur, right? You know, so I saw a video a couple of days ago where it's this guy, I think his name is Alex Stein. He goes around these sort of what do they call them? These committees. There's sort of these city council meetings, and where they give you like 2 minutes to say something. Right. Yeah. So he's a comedian, right? So he went to this one city council meeting and he picked up his phone and he had some objections to one of their particular policies, and so he said, "You guys don't know. You're about to listen to Donald Trump speak." You know, so a guy on his phone, he sounded just like Donald Trump. Wow. Actually, it's almost like you say yourself, that's either AI or it actually was Trump. But then later on, I found out actually it was a different guy, a guy who actually was just an impersonator. You know, so again, coming back to the fundamental point, which is that it's hard to ascertain reality or discern reality online more and more, right? These days, we have movies. Of course, movies make us believe that people have powers and things like that. Right? So we already been dealing with that. You know? But we have to first and foremost, like, you know, okay, this is really happening, right? You know, so say for instance the most recent infection. You know, I want to keep it clean so you don't get sort of
the algorithm strike me down.
The outbreak, you know, that we just sort of quote unquote outbreak, you know, we went through in all of the subsequent sort of protocols and things like that we went through. I mean, was it real? How do we know it was real? Was it as dangerous as they claimed that it was? And if it was, how dangerous? It was dangerous to who? Was it dangerous, more dangerous than others, right? You know, so was it equally dangerous to everyone or not? You know, was there some other objective involved there, right? You know, I mean, so just asking those questions rather than allowing fear and anger, hatred, those type of things to to make us react, right?
Right.
Without thinking. Right? So it's extremely important to apply that to everything. And this is part of Islam. So definitely we need to apply Islam in a lot of different ways, a lot of different levels and a lot of different topics. But to before we're able to make a judgment, pass a judgment about, okay, this is the particular moral value that this particular thing or this act has, we should be sure that, okay, that this thing actually did occur. The same thing with the remedies that they offered. They say, well, this is the remedy this is the problem, here's the solution.
Yeah.
It's totally safe and effective. And it's like, well, how do you know that? Because somebody told us that it is. Okay, well, who's that person? And how does that person know that it's safe and effective? Based upon how much research, how much time, has passed, an experimentation has been done, right?
Right.
They say, oh no, we accelerated the experiment. Well, it usually takes like 10 to 15 years before we know, right? And they say, well, no, we accelerated it this time. Okay. Oh, so you sped up time. You're time traveling. Right? You understand? So it's like, no, it makes no sense. Right? How you going to know that? And an amount of time that needs to pass hasn't passed yet, right?
Right.
So so there's, and I can think of a lot of different issues, but those are just a couple examples.
Yeah, I appreciate. So in a part of the reason why that particular question came to my head is because I'm registering problems that we're having on the ground, even in our communities, in Black Muslim America, and broader Muslim America, in America. And I think that, like, I have a friend, and he says, we just need a book on how to be a husband, how to be a wife. Like, in our communities, there's just some basic things. We need a program just to follow, just so we could be regular people. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So you want to say something to that?
Yeah. I don't know, like, if we need a book about it. I think we learn best from human demonstration. Right? I believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually intended for people to learn from people how to be good people, not from a book, right? I think that's the reason why he didn't just simply send the book. He sent the messenger, alayhi salatu wasalam, with the book to demonstrate how the book is to be applied, right? And because you can have a book and now you have information. Alhamdulillah. I mean, I think it's helpful for some people. Some people, they don't know what, even they can't even imagine what a healthy family perhaps even looks like.
Right.
But people with experience, people who actually who are very effective at detecting, or they're good at detecting, like, people's emotional stage. They have emotional intelligence. They have other types of intelligence too. But I think that's really what will help, is that, because a lot of people, what they fundamentally they need is, okay, well, they need counseling. They need to be shown, like, hey, what something looks like, this is a way, when this particular question comes up, or this particular dispute, maybe this is a good way to handle that. Maybe you shouldn't be so quick to actually say something. Maybe you should think prior to, because quite often in relationships, it's because of what you say out of anger, right? Because once you blurt something out, even if you say, "Oh, that was a mistake, I'm sorry," it's really difficult to kind of like retrieve the sort of you understand what I'm saying, the harmony that you once had in your relationship. So I have a tendency to try to always put myself in the other person's place, right? Try to think about, okay, well, how would they feel how would I feel if someone were to say this to me, what I'm thinking about saying, right? What I'm thinking about doing. Some years ago, I used to say, I don't get it why somebody would commit suicide. And again, I'm not trying to, validate suicide.
Yeah.
But I really was like, I mean, what's wrong with these people? It's like, why would you commit suicide? And Allah made me have a dream after that. And in the dream, I did something wrong. And then they told me that I was going to go to prison for 10 years.
Yeah.
And in my dream, the first thing that jumped in my head was, I'm going to kill myself. Yeah, it's like subhanAllah. It's just so crazy,
Right.
you know. It's and again, so I mean, I have compassion on people who actually they you know, they become despondent and then they feel that, okay, there's nothing I can do but to just take my life.
Yeah.
I do have compassion on them, right? But at the same time, I'm not into promoting it or glorifying it. You know, I think that the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that threaten people with hellfire, you know, and you killing yourself over and over and over in the same way that you killed yourself in this life, that those are important hadith to state when suicide happens, right? They disincentivize it, inshallah. So if you actually, you know, was it from the pot to the, what is it called, from the what's that old saying we have about the frying pan to the fire, from the frying pan to the fire, literally.
Oh yeah.
Those hadiths are meant to actually discourage people from committing suicide.
Yeah.
And so to actually censor the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam when those things happen, I think that's wrong, right? Because there are Muslims that actually do discourage those type of things. I remember back in it was about 5 years ago that there was a family in Texas. A couple of the young boys, they killed the family and then they committed suicide themselves. And they were Muslim doctors who actually sent the message around to the imam saying that, you know, that no one should mention the hadith of the Prophet about suicide. And I said, well, that seems kind of backwards to me. And I purposely actually did the opposite of it. I said, well, I'm not going to censor the Prophet. Listen, everybody's already gone. Who's going to commit suicide because they heard the Prophet say, if you commit suicide, you're going to go to hell? Right. It doesn't make any sense, you know. So why would you censor the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam? Because we want fewer people committing suicide.
That's right.
So I'm sorry, again, rambled a little bit.
No, man, you so let me transition. I do want to highlight some of your work. You're doing some very good work with the podcast, the book. The first book, again, is, I believe this one's, the Kindle version is available. The paperback is it's a little pricey. The Negro in Arab Muslim Consciousness. Right. I know the videos may still be around. You're doing some presentations on that. If you can give, because I want to get to, there is no male preference in Islamic law, and then the work that you're doing. So kind of speak, you know, the modern work. Can you kind of give us a synopsis of the first work, not your first work, but the first one I mentioned just now?
Yeah. I think a good place to start there is just the origin of that book.
Yes.
Like what even got me on that trajectory. I remember some years ago, a friend of mine, as a matter of fact, Imam Dawud Yassin, he was an imam in Connecticut. He's in Texas now. He was at Zaytuna prior to that. But when he was an imam in Connecticut, he called me one time and he told me that there was a brother from North African Arab country, who was married to an African American sister. And so he was telling her that they had to go 50-50 on like all the bills. And I found it to be strange. I said, well, why would he do that? I mean, why would he demand that? If it was one from his own country, then he wouldn't demand that from her. Right? Yeah. Then a Pakistani brother who was one of my students, he's come to my home and he was taking private classes with me. He sent me a message one day and said that, you know, he come across another brother from a similar country who actually, you know, was married, or actually wanted to marry an African-American sister. She was about 30 years old and she wanted to get married. And he proposed to her, but her father objected to the marriage. He didn't want to marry her to this guy. But the guy sent her a message telling her that she didn't need her father's permission. When he was confronted on the issue, he sent the individual who confronted him a quote from a book, a Maliki source, which basically said that a Black woman does not require or is not required to follow the normal sequence of guardians, right, when it comes to marriage, because she's considered to be undesirable, right? You know, and I was like, whoa. And again, I'm a student of the Maliki school, and I read this stuff before, but I didn't really notice this much of it, right? You know, so I got into the commentaries and and then the super commentaries. And I was like, boy, man, this is really interesting here, and it's easier to find in the Maliki school. But like all these Africans are Malikis. And I'm just like, well, why are so many Africans Maliki, even though this stuff exists in the school? So it led me to sort of like look into this question of blackness, right? What does it mean to be black? Not only to, us here naturally, but what did it mean for the Arabs? What did it mean for the Africans? Even more, right? And so as I delve deeper into this, I come to realize that in the old world, that there are different types of blacks, right? And the Negro was the worst of them, right? In other words, the word the Negro is Zanj or Zanji, right? Because you look into the Arab dictionaries, Arab to English dictionaries, Hansver, you look into J.G. Hava's dictionary, and both of them translate Zanj as Negro. And I said to myself, okay, well, Negro, Spanish word means black, no problem. But still, like, okay, why not just say black, right? Or, some type of territory, whatever, So and I started to look a little bit deeper into the Arabic dictionaries and trying to see if someone actually gave some specific description, right, of who these people were, where their location was. And alhamdulillah, I was able to find these things. And it came out that the Negro was considered to be the uncivilized version of all the different types of blacks that exist, right? And so there's an old book that was written probably in the 4th century of Islam called Hudud al-Alam, the limits of the world. The author is unknown, but it's definitely from that time. The book itself, nobody knows who wrote the book, right? But it's from that time, and apparently the author was an explorer, and he was an Arab apparently too, because he wrote the book in Arabic. So he talks about. He's kind of like Ibn Khaldun or Ibn Battuta, right? So they traveled as well. And so he talks about when he went down towards the, I guess we would call like the equator, right? Sort of sub-Saharan desert, right, of Africa, on the east coast of Africa.
Yeah.
And he found these people. He said that these people were naked. They were cannibals. They were very warlike, right? It was hard, to even negotiate with them, that they were uncivilized. You couldn't really it was hard to even understand their language, right? So he said these things about them. And he said, there are no Muslims here. But then he moved up a little bit further to the north to a place called Zabij. And in Zabij, he said, okay, when Zabij, the people are half naked, they're not cannibals, right? There are some Muslims there, right? But then we moved up to Abyssinia. He says, these are some of the most beautiful people, that you've seen. They're very peace-loving. There are a lot of Muslims there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, well, okay, so even in the Arab mindset in the past, and you can find this also repeated by scholars like Mas'udi, right? Who actually was writing after this particular author, who are similar sort of division, the different types of blacks, right? And they're not, all the same, right? So I said to myself, okay, well, I think that the Negro is a word which was applied to the Zanj, right? And this is where you get the stereotypical sort of viewpoint about, the black savage, and and of course we get from Negro, get the N-word and all these things, right? And So I was really interested in that, and I wanted to understand even among the Sahaba, like how they interacted with the people who may qualify as what we call Negro, right? And if there's any distinction, I wanted to know like the color of the Sahaba, So because typically we think about Bilal ibn Rabah, radiallahu anhu, and we say, okay, well, Bilal was discriminated against because he was black. Now, for me, I've come to the conclusion that was not the reason he was discriminated against. It wasn't because of his black skin at all. It actually was because he was simply what we call an outsider to Arabia. An outsider in the sense that his father most likely was not an Arab. There's very little known about his father. We know his father's name, but there's very little known about his father, right? And I know that some people have claimed that his father was an Arab, I don't accept that argument. I think that he was probably himself an Abyssinian, but Bilal was born and raised in Arabia. His mother definitely was also Ethiopian. But if you actually look at the descriptions of the Sahaba, like for instance, someone like Ammar ibn Yasir, of course he was the son of an Abyssinian woman, who was Sumayya bin Khuyat, right? But also Abu Dharr al-Ghifari. You learn a lot of them. There's a narration of Ali ibn Abi Talib, radiallahu an, which is found in the Tabaqat ibn Sa'd, related by Muhammad al-Baqir, the famous Imam of the Shia, right, who is actually a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. He describes Ali ibn Abi Talib as being the same complexion as Bilal ibn Rabah, right? Yeah. Osama ibn Zayd ibn Haritha. There are a number of them. So to all this leads me to conclude this. Well, it could not be because of his skin color, right? So typically, what we find is that among the Arabs, the people who actually were discriminated against were either slaves or former slaves, or just people who just simply were not Arabs, right? Or a combination of them. So for instance, Suhaib al-Rumi. Right. Suhaib al-Rumi was ethnically an Arab. He's only called Suhaib al-Rumi because when he was a little boy, he was kidnapped and taken into Rome. Right. And then he returned to Arabia later on when he was an adult. And by the time he had returned, he had lost the ability to speak fluently in Arabic. Right. So they call him Suhaib al-Rumi. So for instance, there's a story about Umar ibn Khattab visiting Suhaib on his estate. And with Umar is one of his own servants, Aslam. And so as Suhaib sees them approaching, he starts to jump up with joy and he says, Ya Nas, Ya Nas, Ya Nas, And so in Arabic, Ya Nas means, oh people, right? Umar ibn Khattab says to Aslam, he says, well, that's really strange. We don't call people that way. Why is he saying, oh people, oh people? But Aslam says, no, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. He's not saying, oh people. He's calling his servant, Yohannas. Again, he found it difficult to pronounce the words, right? Yeah. Bilal, on the other hand, was fluent. Bilal actually spoke better Arabic than Suhaib al-Rumi. Right. He was born and raised in Arabia. As a matter of fact, there's a fabricated hadith that says that Bilal, when he recited the adhan, that he couldn't say sheen.
Yeah, that's very popular.
So he would say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Yeah. But no. And so there's a hadith that says the Prophet said that Bilal's seen is sheen according to Allah. With Allah, his seen is a sheen. And a number of hadith scholars, they say this hadith was fabricated. Ibn Kathir in his Bidayah wa Nihaya goes as far as saying that Bilal was not only had a beautiful voice, right? But Bilal was one of the most eloquent of all people, right? And he's talking about hadith. He said that hadith is fabricated. Yeah. Bilal has his own poetry, right? So in other words, I was concerned with, again, just like, what does it mean to be black in the minds of the Arabs? What does it mean to be black, even among the blacks themselves, right? There are different types of blacks. Maybe the Africans who became Malikis, they either didn't see these injunctions of these Egyptian scholars who were saying that black women don't have to follow the priority, sort of the order of priority when it comes to guardians in marriage, because they're undesirable. Maybe they didn't see those things, or maybe they just said, "Hey, man, that's some cultural stuff happening. Yeah. That's just some tribal cultural stuff. We don't share their sentiments when it comes to these things, So that has nothing to do with Imam Malik himself or the Maliki school. So we are Malikis, right? So those are some of the things I was really interested in, and what sort of led to that book being written. And it was actually it was my dissertation that I had written to get my Ph.D.
That's amazing. I think that I can recall you probably remember, this is one of those the book Imam Muhammad came out with, or they published, As the Light Shineth from the East. Mm-hmm. And I remember him addressing just this identity problem. Yeah. Identity has always seemed to be a problem with black people, definitely coming from Christianity. Right. Yeah. We know that history. Right. But even in Islam, and that language is really resurging on platforms like YouTube. You know, you have a lot of these people, they're untrained. They're just literally going online to sunnah.com and they're pulling up, you know, the prophet traded 2 black slaves for 1 Arab. It's like, oh, so you're saying is 2 blacks are worth 1 Arab? I mean, they're just doing a number. And again, I'm going to be calling on you. That's why I need because that's what it's for. I mean, I think that you made a good point about, you know, you didn't put it in these words. I'm putting in these words. I'm putting it this way. A part of our dawah is people seeing how we live. Just as good human beings. And at the same time, we know people have an intellect. People need to understand certain things, and things need to be explained clearly. So the question of identity, why are black people always at the bottom? And the current argument is, even in Islam, blacks are at the bottom because this type of research has not been widespread enough to combat these incorrect notions. So I appreciate that. So I'm going to transition to the next book. So
can I say something about that before you transition?
Yes, sir.
I mean, I know we said 2 hours. I mean, if we go a little bit beyond, it's not a problem, right?
Hey, okay, yeah.
That's not a problem. But what's interesting about that is, you know, on the surface, it sounds valid. You say, okay, well, you have to speak Arabic, or the Quran itself is revealed in Arabic. The Kaaba is in Arabia. You know, certain Arab cultural practices like name changing, things like that. Yeah. Right. The Arab dress, right, or the Arab influence dress, right, upon so many different people. So yeah, it sounds like, okay, that's like Arab supremacy, right? So I can understand completely why a Pan-Africanist would say, okay, hey, well, this is actually privileging those particular people. But there's a very insightful scholar from the 18th century, well, 19th century, 1800s, right? Thought ibn Ashur, and he has a tafsir, exegesis, and he actually dealt with this issue in a different way. He actually talked about how, because there's a verse in Surah Fussilat where it's quoting the mushrikeen demand of the Prophet ﷺ that he produce a Quran which is not in Arabic. Yeah, but then the Quran responds, "Ajamiyyun wa Arabi." So in other words, you want a non-Arabic Quran, even though the Prophet himself is Arabic, right? He himself is an Arab. You know, in other words, you know, they weren't saying it because they really were interested in being guided. They were just, again, raising an additional objection, right? You know, so trying to come up with another excuse not to actually accept Islam. That's right. But Thought ibn Ashur, he makes this point. He said the thing that's interesting about the way that Islam came to the world is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he could have chosen the Greeks, the Romans, and he could have chosen the Byzantines and revealed the Quran in their language. He could have chosen the Persians and revealed the Quran in their language. He could have chosen, Amharic, or the those of East Africa, the Kingdom of Aksum. He could have chosen their language to reveal the Quran in their language. Arabia, for all three of those major sort of forces in the world at the time, was insignificant to them. Right. They didn't see themselves in competition with the Arabs. Right? They said, well, what the Arabs have is just all a bunch of dirt and sand. And what do they have? They have this box in the middle of the desert that people visit every single year. They don't have anything that we have an interest in, no resources, etc. Right. They didn't have anything that would be the source of envy. But he said, had Allah revealed the Quran in Persian, the Byzantines probably would have said, no, I'm never going to accept Islam. Yeah. If he had revealed it in Greek, the Persians would have said, no, I'm not going to accept Islam because those people aren't my enemies. I'm not going to follow them because they're giving and the same thing for those in the East Africa, right? They probably, if they would have accepted, if Allah revealed it in their particular language, then the other two empires would have said, no, we're not going to follow you, right? Yeah. But Allah revealed it to the Arabs in the middle of the desert, right? These people who were not a source of envy of any of those particular powers. And that itself made it easier for them to accept Islam, right? Because they say, okay, the Quran has been revealed to these people who we look down upon, right? Or these people we don't have an interest or we're not doing any competition with them, right? the great wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that he revealed it in Arabia, in the Arabic language, to a people who actually were not the source of envy of these major powers at the time.
Yeah.
So pride is the greatest disincentive from embracing the truths.
Right.
I mean, that was Shaitan. Wasn't the same thing Shaitan there? Bow down to Adam. Bow down, prostrate to Adam.
Right.
Why would I do that? Why would I do that? You created me from fire, created him from clay. Right. And I say the same thing for the Pan-Africanists. Pan-Africans like, why would I bow down to the Arab? I'm better than the Arab. Right. Yeah. Why would I bow down to the white man? And I'm better than the white man. They claim they're better than us. No, but we're better than them. So again, pride gets in people's way. Right. Yeah. So when you put your pride down, right, then it's easier for you to embrace or submit to God. You're submitting to God. See, when the angels prostrated to Adam, they weren't doing it because of who Adam was.
Right.
They looked at God. They said, "Oh, Allah, our creator, wants us to do this." Right. Yeah. We're not worshiping Adam. We're doing it because Allah said, do it. Iblis looked at Adam.
Right.
He said, you know what? No, I'm not prostrating to that thing. Right. So again, I want to just add that. I want to add that before you translate.
No, that's really good. As you're saying it, I'm thinking about how the ego that Iblis is really typifying for us as a lesson. It sees on the surface.
Right.
The one who's motivated by his ego, he sees things on the surface because that's all his ego allows him to perceive. But the one who is not poisoned by the problem of the ego, he can see into the essence.
That's right.
And when he looks into the essence, he can see the presence of Allah or Allah's will or Allah's command, however we term it, depending upon, but that's very important because we have come into a time in the history of the world, like you mentioned earlier, tribalism, nationalism. We see the whole reality on the surface now.
Right.
Everything is identity politics. I'm this and I'm that. And we have made the accidents the essence.
That's right.
So this is the problem. So I hadn't heard that before, but that's a beautiful, I don't know about you, man, but it's like a day or a few days before Ramadan, I can already feel it. You just feel when your mother starts cooking.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Before you get home, you can feel it on the inside, the beauty of these things. So, well, let me ask you another question. Since you touched upon that, Imam Mendez was here talking, and he was making the point of how what a lot of the Pan-Africanist brothers need to understand is the nature of the Afro-Semitic languages. You mentioned, for example, Amharic.
Right.
So there's we have been so, from our experience, everything is black and white.
Yeah.
It's either Central Africa or Norway. It's just
yeah. Right.
Whereas he was saying, well, look, Arabic is actually a part of a language group shared by people across this particular span of landmass. And it really, they share several features, one of which is the grammar, which determines a set of thought pattern. In other words, then, and even when you go into the history of like Hajar, and all of those, all of these, it's really foolish for me to claim Africa and at the same time divorce myself from Arabia.
Yes, right.
I'm saying, you have anything to add to that perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's how can you divorce yourself from Arabia when your prophet is from Arabia? I mean, the one who God chose to be his final messenger is from Arabia. Yeah. And his moral teachings are what mainly define who we are.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, your race or your culture, I mean, that particular aspect of your identity is secondary or tertiary, right? To that. In other words, like you said, it's not the essence, right?
Yeah.
It's the accidental part of it. And it's just simply a test, to see how you will conduct yourself in this world, right? And so we all have our tests, right? And so that just happened to be one of them. And so I definitely agree with that. I do think that, Yeah, of course, it is definitely a one of many languages, right? Shared between a lot of different groups of people, right? But to me, I always come back to the religious aspect of it too, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us here to be khulafa of this earth.
Yeah.
And he gave us his revealed law and morality for us to live by in order for us to be equipped or best equipped to fulfill that particular role for which we were created. So there's no way to disassociate ourselves from that, right? And as we know, I mean, to hate an Arab is to hate the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. So that we have to be very careful about that, but it's not so much about we have to embrace Arab culture as it is today and follow the Arabs as they are today, right? But we just simply acknowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he saw some value in those people at the time, and especially that one person, and he revealed his book to them, and then because of them, we have Islam today, right? So we have to show some gratitude to them.
Yeah, and I'm again, I'm reflecting as you speaking, and it seems, we know Allah is just,
yeah,
and
exactly.
You can actually see gifts dispersed throughout humanity. So the Afrocentric or Pan-Africanists, I think they'll say more nowadays, he wants to say we started civilization, we built the pyramids. He wants that glory.
Yeah.
But then he does. It's like you want everything. So really, you've become a white supremacist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's reactionary. It's too reactionary. It's like, okay, because they claim they did this, we claim that. And again, I understand it. I get it, because what a lot of people don't see, especially today anymore, are the different books that were written, during the Enlightenment period, and perhaps even before that, which berated a lot of different cultures, but especially Black African culture.
Yeah.
I mean, you read, for instance, The Inequality of the Human Races by Arthur de Gobineau, who actually is the person who actually developed the Aryan master race theory. He was like a French aristocrat, right? He was very influential. Right. So in there, he even lists, these are the civilizations that are there. And the reason why they are civilizations and the reason why they actually were considered to be good was because they had some admixture of Aryan blood. Right. That's the only time civilization happens, Wow. But they said, and the less Aryan blood you have, the less civilized you are, or the less civilizing capacity you have. And so for them to be a civilization fundamentally meant that you had the power or the ability to actually to impose your will on other people. So they praise that, they consider that a good thing, so people adopt your culture, your ways, so this is a sign of superiority for them, so we say, okay, well, what about us? Okay, yeah, well, we had a contribution too. We contributed to society too. We built the pyramids, and we did this, or we influenced the ancient Greeks. Right, Aristotle and all those people, they took a lot of the information from Africa. Okay, that may be all fine and dandy, it might be true, but we have to remember too that you really can't attribute, or rather say judge, an entire population on the basis of what one or two people do.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying? It's like we get so worked up about, like, okay, or let's say, for instance, like in our tradition, we have scholars like Ibn Sina, the great physician. There's Farabi, the great philosopher. There's Averroes or Ibn Rushd, also one of the great philosophers and legal minds of Islamic history. Only recently have they become sort of cherished people among the Sunnis. Right? Throughout Islamic history, throughout Sunni history, the Sunnis are like, no, these people are not good. These people are heretical. They're heretics. Right. So like Ibn Sina and Farabi, Imam Ghazali actually does takfir of them in his book, Munkar bin Dalal, right? Munkar bin Dalal, he does takfir of them for adopting certain beliefs of the ancient Greeks.
Ibn Rushd also was maligned, right? And people did take fear of him as well. But now today it's like, oh, because we found out the West like these people. It's like, or it's like, oh yeah, they're one of us. No, but they didn't do. If they did what they did because of Islam, then I would say, okay, oh, this is an Islamic contribution, right? And of course, in some levels, we can say that, yeah, they probably did. They probably were thinking, okay, that Islam allows for me to do these things and to think this way and to articulate these ideas. They probably did believe that on some level. But quite often, like, people are just simply curious, right? Allah inspires some people to be more curious than others, and they do certain things. And then we say, okay, hey, you know, this person is great because he's a Muslim, or this person is great because he's black. This person is great because they're white. Yeah. You know, so these are the people we have come from our race. That means that all of us have the similar type of potential. But there's really no evidence for that, especially when we consider the ways that race itself, you know, the boundaries of race, right? They change from time and climb. So, it like what it means to be black in Brazil is not what it means to be black in Arabia, you know, or to be black in North Africa, or even America. Right? You know, what qualifies as black in Brazil? I mean, they actually have like the reverse. Like one drop rule, right? So for us, it's like, okay, you got one drop of African blood, you're black. Them is like, hey, you got one drop of white blood, European blood, then you're no longer black.
Wow, yeah.
And a similar thing happens in Haiti. It's the same thing in Haiti. So Haiti, Brazil. The different conceptions of black, you know. So we have the tendency to think that, okay, well, all these people in these different parts of the world, that they actually see themselves as one people, right? That we're all one people, but they really don't, right? Even within Africa, you have different tribes. The Wolof didn't see themselves the same as the Mandinka, right? You know what I'm saying? So it's really difficult. I mean, on one level, but on another level, it's very, to me, I actually enjoy it, like discovering like just the different attitudes about race and belongingness and those type of things. But no, you're one of us, you are not one of us, right? And it was the same thing for the Arabs. Again, just one example coming back to Ammar bin Yasser. Like, his father, Yasser, was from Yemen. And the way he ended up in the Hijaz was that one of his brothers was missing. So he and two of his brothers went searching for his brother. They went up to the Hijaz. They didn't find them. So the two of them, they left. They went back to Yemen. But Yasser, he remained in Arabia, and then eventually he marries Sumayya. Yeah. Now, he's far away from his tribe. He's an Arab himself, but he didn't have the same protection. He was persecuted. Why is he persecuted? Because he wasn't one of them. Right. Even though he could say, listen, I'm an Arab, right? So it wasn't, the Arabs themselves didn't see them all as one people. Right? So, on one sense, yes, but another sense, no, we're not. He's not one of us, right? You know, he may be living on our protection, but he's not really one of us. So he's going to be persecuted because his people are way down in southern Arabia. Yeah, right? You know, they can't get to him that easily. So.
And that's that perspective is extremely important. So let me transition here. Okay. I really wanted to ask you about it. There is no male preference in Islamic law. I don't want to assume. I was going to crack a joke, but I'm going to hold my joke for a minute. What synopsis of this book? The inspiration behind? Make sure I get it in. The inspiration behind it, the translation. You know, in synopsis of the text.
Yeah. Well, the author, the original author, was one of my teachers, rahimahullah, Sheikh Muhammad al-Tawil, who died in 2015. Very, you know, important legal scholar in my opinion, an individual who believes, you know, wholeheartedly in the supremacy of Islam, I guess you would say, but also tried to take on some of the challenges of today. You know, which were originating from the West, and in particular, how the West was attempting to poison the minds of Muslim women, right? Yeah, against Islam. And the fundamental argument, I think we could say, is that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, when He gives responsibilities to some people that he does not give to others, or exempts from responsibility some, as opposed to in others he doesn't exempt them from the responsibilities. It's not based upon their sex. In the sense that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala he's not really looking at, okay, that what qualifies you is because not only it's not like it's not just because you're getting more in this situation, not merely because you're a man, but because some additional accidental sort of characteristic on top of that, right? Or if a woman doesn't have certain obligations, or she gets less in inheritance, for instance, it's not merely because she's a woman. It's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees that justice is to be found in giving the man more because of the greater responsibility that has been placed upon that man, for instance, right? Yeah. So on the surface, so it's kind of a difficult argument to make to say, okay, there's no male preference, because people think of preference as inequality, or the idea of lack of symmetry between two people. Or I would say that his argument perhaps would validate Aristotle's viewpoint about injustice, where he says that treating unequal people unequally is not injustice. It's only injustice when you treat equals unequally. Right. So the idea that there's a such thing as equal and unequal people, right, in society is the idea of hierarchy. Islam is not averse to hierarchy, right? Even in our beliefs, like when we study Aqidah, there's some people who perhaps they don't like the sort of the manuals of Aqidah, but like when we generally study Aqidah, we learn things like, okay, well, who is the best of all people? They say, okay, well, it's the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Well, after the prophets in general, right? Then there's a debate about the angels better than people, or people better than angels. You have those things that come up. But, then among the Sahaba, who's the best of Sahaba? Abu Bakr, then the Umar, then Uthman, then Ali. And then there's debate. Some pit was Ali, some pit Ali before Uthman. You have those type of debates that going on. Then who? Then the people of Badr. Then who? The people of Uhud. Then who? The people of the Bay'ah, et cetera, et cetera. So you have this discussion about people who are deemed to be superior to the rest of the ummah, or superior to people of their particular generation, et cetera, et cetera. So we already accept the idea, right? As human beings, we actually, even without the Aqidah, we all acknowledge that there's a difference between strong people and weak people. Just the words, our very vocabulary tells us this. Some people are strong, some people are weak. Strength is important in certain situations. Weakness is important in certain situations as well. I mean, physical weaknesses, has advantages sometimes as well. Being skinny has advantages in certain cases. Right. Being fat may have, or bulky may. You understand? So
there's two things that's coming to my mind. Number one is it's interesting because we think about inequality from an oppressed paradigm, right? Whereas we say the prophet we see him as the best of creation, but he rendered the greatest service.
That's right.
So that's a different shift. He wasn't an oppressor. He was the least oppressor.
Yes. Right.
And so that's an attribute of him as the best of creation. Right. And then when you go down those ranks, another thing, and I hate to cut your train of thought, but this is like
no. I like to hear from you too.
So you remind me of the transition you were just in. Thomas Sowell, he really hits home with that about how look, there's no such thing as equal distribution in nature amongst nations. That just really doesn't exist. Right. That's more so of a it's like a fiction.
It's a fiction. Yeah.
It's a fiction.
Yeah.
And we conceptualize things in that matter, perhaps to just make a mental map of the world to just navigate. So when we think of car, no one thinks of a hoopty, what we used to call hoopties back in the day. They think of this ideal car, but maybe that type doesn't even necessarily exist. So so Bismillah, what you were saying, I wanted to just interject that. It's a very good point.
No, alhamdulillah. No, that's really, really I appreciate the contribution. So it's so the book highlights of course, like for instance, in the first section, he talks about like a number of issues where one would assume that that if it's an issue, the judgment itself is disadvantageous to women, that the female scholars would probably say, you know what, we're going to actually take the more lenient position and rule in such a way so that women have more power, have more responsibility or more influence, right? Mm-hmm. But he's highlighting, they say, well, there are all these issues, here's Aisha, here's Asma bint Abi Bakr, here's this woman or that woman compared to Abdullah bin Abbas and Umar ibn Khattab. And the men in those scenarios, they're actually taking the more lenient position. And the women are the ones actually taking the more strict position. They're placing greater strictures on women, right? And you would think it would be the opposite. And so he argues that, well, the reason that they're not doing that is because, because they didn't see themselves as legislators. They didn't see legislators, and that the fuqaha themselves, they believe that they're uncovering, disclosing God's ruling on these issues, right?
Yeah.
Because in Islam, we're not legislators, right? When it comes to morality. Allah has already judged, right? Yes. And we just go through a process to try to disclose and to clarify, to uncover what we believe is God's judgment. That's the first reason. The second reason is because they weren't doing it because they were women, and they weren't doing it because they were men. They were doing it because, again, they were fuqaha, they were jurists. He says, well, they're looking for the truth. Their goal is the haqq, right? Mm-hmm. Regardless of where it teaches them, where it takes them. I'm sorry, regardless of where it takes them. That was their ultimate goal, right? So you don't see that, throughout most of Islamic history, and then all of a sudden become to our time, when these new ideologies come about, especially feminism, etc., gender theology, those type of things. Then all of a sudden, Muslims are struggling with these things now, and so he wanted to give ammunition to women and to Muslim men as well to say, hey, listen, we have to stand up for our religion. We have to engage in the dialectic, right, with others in the debate on some level, right? Sometimes we will have rational explanation for why this is the case. Other times we won't have a rational explanation. And so in those moments when we don't have an explanation, he says, well, that's what submission is about. Yeah. We don't need to know why all the time. Allah, alhamdulillah, gives us why on a number of occasions, right? But sometimes he doesn't give us why, right? And that's part of the test. That's what faith is all about. Is that, okay, well, I trust the Creator. The Creator said that this is what is expected of me, and that's what I'm going to go with, rather than me trying to alter the divine law or try to claim that it's been abrogated or it's been superseded by something else, because then we won't be faithful people at that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and which is it's really the opposite of the modern ethos in terms of intellectual life. If I can't process it in my mind, it's not. I can't accept it. Right. And that's probably, it's not only is it problematic, it hasn't served us very well in this society.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
And I think that this contribution, this is something that's also, besides the race problem, those again on these social media platforms, Christian apologists or whatever or what have you, they go from the race, then they go to the treatment of the women. I think the treatment of the women, even going back to pre 9/11 day, that was the big thing. So for example, a sister, this early on when I first started my channel, she got in the comments asking about why do the women inherit less, and she even came from the direction of, I don't need a man. Even if he has a certain degree of responsibility, I can manage the money myself. So when you hear that type of reasoning, where do you locate the problem?
Right. Well, I think the problem is located in the fact that too many people believe that they can explain why God says that this is the injunction that he has imposed upon people. I remember when I was in high school, and this girl, she came to me. She said, "Hey, you don't eat pork, do you?" And I said, "No, I don't eat pork." She said, "Well, why not?" So I said to her, "Because the pig is a filthy animal.
Yeah,
It eats
yeah,
whatever you throw to it, it eats it, right? Because that's what I was told. That's what it was all about. That's the
right,
reason why. And then she
right.
said to me, well, fish eat whatever you throw to them too.
That's right.
And I was like, I was stuck. I didn't know what to say right at that moment, right? But she had a very cogent argument. You see, so what happens is that we get too reliant upon rationality.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, rationality is important. Allah gave us reason. We use our brains, right? But when we start to think that we can discern the reason for every single injunction, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I typically, again, when I'm talking to sisters, like sisters I teach, I always remind them of this: is that we can know. Excuse me, I'm sorry. That we can know like the reasons for a lot of things, right? Because Allah says it, or His Messenger says why. This is the reason why. But then other times we're just guessing.
Yeah.
Like another sister, for instance, she was her and her husband have some problems, and she wanted to divorce, and basically I told her that, okay, if you are, if he decides to divorce you, that you still have to wait your iddah, right? You have to wait till your cycle comes and it's over, and there's no intimacy, after that, and and you have the 3 cycles. So she said to me, well, why do I have to do 3 cycles? I'll know that I'm right. I know I'm not pregnant, by the first month, right?
Yeah.
So I explained to her, I said, well, who told you that? Like, that's the only reason why you wait 3 months.
That's right.
The Quran actually even mentions women who don't have a cycle. Yeah. They still have to wait 3 months, right? Yeah. So of course, a wisdom, something we learn from this particular injunction is that, okay, if a woman is at childbearing age, then we do learn in the process, okay, whether or not she's pregnant.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that that's the only reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that this is why you wait 3 months. Because the rest we call it's ta'abudi, right? It's indiscernible explanation. Like it's a devotional aspect to it as well, right? So 3 months, right? I mean, her husband dies, right? Her mourning period is 4 months and 10 days. Yeah. Why? We don't know. Why 4 months and 10 days? Why not 1 month, 3 days? Yeah. Why not a year? Well, I don't know. Nobody who really knows why that is. And so when it comes to like inheritance law, it's the same thing. Like with inheritance law, the thing that I often highlight with inheritance law and similar injunction is that when you want to know whether or not something's immutable, you actually look for that verse at the end of the list of those verses that talk about the laws. Tilka hududullahi fala ta'taduha. These are the boundaries set by God. Yeah. Therefore, do not transgress them. Right. And that's exactly what happens at the end of those verses. Right. So even if a woman is taking care of herself, even okay, there's no, God says that this is His rules. Right. He said you can't go beyond those rules. Right. Yeah. So it means it's immutable. These laws are immutable. You can't change them. Right. Regardless of how you try to square it. So if it says that 2 to 1. Right, for certain situations, because actually I teach inheritance law too, and then we always have nice number of laughs in class because we have scenarios where there are these women. There's a scenario, there's a bunch of women, they have like their men in scenario, and then the men are not inheriting, and then they say, okay, because those women are there, they bar them from inheriting. And I said, well, hold up, what's happening here? That's not supposed to be happening. How are the women inheriting and the men are not inheriting? And in some scenarios, the woman's getting more than the man. I say, well, hold up, wait a minute. I thought the men are supposed to always get more than the women, right? And so we always laugh. We really make it fun when we go through these things. But it's not an absolute rule. Okay? It's an absolute rule. It mainly applies to brothers and sisters, children, or children of the deceased, brothers and sisters, or one sibling. And there are 3 different types of siblings. But typically, the rational explanation that some people offer is that, the reason that the men are receiving more is because men have greater financial responsibilities. Right? The men have the responsibility to take care of their wives, take care of their children, take care of their parents if the parents are old and they're poor. Yeah. Right. And those responsibilities are generally not responsibilities of the woman, with the exception of maybe the Hanafis. The Hanafis, if they have a daughter, for instance, who she's well-to-do, she has some money, and her parents are poor, the Hanafis say, okay, the daughter has to also take care of the parents, right? But the Malikis said no, that the women have no financial responsibilities at all, right, towards their husband or children or their parents, right, in those type of situations. So this is often like an explanation given, but again, I always caution people, say, yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense when you put it that way, but don't assume that is the reason, or rather the only reason that God has actually said that this is what the situation should be. And also just remember that there are a lot of scenarios where men and women are getting the same amount. Right, because for instance, what we call maternal siblings, that the maternal siblings, they have the same mother but different father. Yeah, that in that situation, that the men and the women are getting the exact same share. It's only when they're full-blooded siblings and what we call paternal siblings, they have the same father, different mother, or they have the same mother and father, where you have 2-to-1 ratio. Right. So this is spelled out in the Quran itself, but it's definitely an important issue naturally that people raise, because they think that it should be the same, because they think that there's no difference between men and women. Right. Even though we acknowledge that there clearly is a difference between men and women, both in respect to our physiology, our anatomy, and then also our responsibilities too. They don't have the same responsibility. It'd be interesting, like, to see, Muslim men. Well, I'm not looking forward to that day. I would feel like it's all over once Muslim men start to complain. Oh man, this is unequal. Why is it that men have all this financial responsibilities and women have none of the same responsibilities? Right? Yeah, it's time to leave Earth when that happens. Right. Yeah. So it's like, okay, well, in the relationship, in the marriage, could they say, okay, that the reason that a man has to provide for his wife is because his wife provides him sexual access to herself, right? So he has to take care of her. Okay, well, men also, provide themselves, their wives, sexual access to themselves too. Yeah. Right. So why is it that I have to pay, but she doesn't have to pay me? Right. So it's so it's really, you can really take this in a really interesting direction if you really wanted to. But alhamdulillah, we haven't had that happen yet. But it's definitely just one of those wedge issues that they utilize to try to discourage our sisters from being more committed to the religion. Yes, sir. Well, I want to transition. I know, and I want to remind the audience, Talking with Teachers, that's the podcast. And I know you have a host of really, I think, accomplished. I don't know. Has everyone been from the United States? I know you had Jonathan Brown. I've seen no, not everyone. I mean, there's some interviews. There's at least one interview from someone from the UK that I have. There's another. Yeah, most of them have been from the U.S. so far, right? But there's Mufti Abdul-Rahmaan bin Yusuf is from the U.K. I haven't posted his interview yet. Okay, I saw Mustafa Briggs. Mustafa Briggs also is from the U.K. That's right. I saw the clip about Sheikh Ibrahim Inyas, and I watched the. Is it Dr. Zainab Ansari? Is she a doctor? I don't think so. I don't believe she has. I think she has an MA, but not a Ph.D. So okay, but I again, the link is in the description. You all subscribe to the Lamppost Education Initiative channel. Support the excellent work that our brother is doing. Before I let you go, Doctor, I have to bring this up because it's Ramadan. We're entering into the Shahrul Ramadan, and even when you were just talking now, one of the things that I love, that I just find touching about the Quran, we know the Fatiha, it's the Fatiha. It really technically opens the Quran. But when you begin Surah Al-Baqarah, that's when you like delving in. And I see it as just a beautiful thing. Just the first ayah, Alif Lam Mim. And it really connects me to the line of reasoning that you were expounding upon just now. It's 3 letters. 3 letters. Right. And no one can tell you definitively what it means. Exactly. The biggest shake, the floor sweeper, no one. Right. And it really, one of the lessons that I see in it is just Allah knows and you know not. That's right. And
that should be our orientation always. So and that's what I'm hearing with you, even from the ayat that are legal, that dealing with legal issues.
Mm-hmm.
We can speculate sometimes when it's safe to speculate.
Right.
There are some wisdoms, but in the final analysis, Allah knows and we don't know. So we
That's right.
always have to sort of remain in this spirit of humility. So enter the Quran in that spirit, and remain in that spirit.
Yeah.
The month of Ramadan. So what would you give us in terms of our approach to the Quran, our approach to the fasting? Anything you would like to share for the benefit of the audience?
Inshallah. Yeah, very good question. But I would start with the issue about speculation, right? I think that, once again, that to understand that when the Prophet ﷺ passed away from this world, alayhi salatu wasalam, then that was the end of direct communication between humanity and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so our predecessors and all the generations, they understood that anything that they would had to offer, which was not directly stated in the Quran or in the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, that it was just them speculating, right? So it might be right, might be wrong, right? But they do their best. They do due diligence. The month of Ramadan is this blessed month. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all the strength to begin it, to continue it, and to end it, inshallah, in the best way. Ameen. May He give us life, to see it, inshallah, and benefit from it in the best way. That the very first command we know in the Quran is Iqra. It's read. This is what the Prophet ﷺ was asked to do, or rather recite. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Recite in the name of Allah, or recite the name of your Lord who created. Because that's one way to read the surah or the ayah itself, is recite the name of your Lord. Because the Prophet, we know he couldn't read or write. So it's possible that, or more likely, in my view, that it meant to recite. And so we're expected to recite the Quran, we're expected to read it. And the very final command given to the Prophet, according to a strong opinion about the final verse revealed, is وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ, and have taqwa, or take shield against the day wherein you shall be returned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what's interesting about the Quran is that the Quran is a book of guidance. It is said that is the guidance for the muttaqeen, for the pious, the God conscious, right? So Allah tells, read it, but then also become people of taqwa. Take a shield against that day, right? In other words, by avoiding prohibitions, by fulfilling His commandments. And so the fast of Ramadan is also la'allakum tattaqun, in order that you become people of piety, people of conscience, people of virtue, right? And I also often like to highlight this, that the difference between a good act and a virtue is fundamentally that a virtue or a virtuous person is an individual who wants to do good even when he doesn't have the opportunity to do so, right? So the fast is about trying to train us to become people of virtue, people who actually want to become better people, people who feel the urge to do good things even when they don't have the opportunity to do so. So reading the Quran is meant to help us to become those virtuous people. Allah He's created us with animalistic appetites. He's also given us rationality, but the animalistic appetite we have for food, drink, sexual intercourse, similar things like that, even sleep, right? We all pleasure sleep when we're tired, right? That's the animalistic aspect of the human being, and through those particular senses or faculties we've been given, we're able to discern the world, to know what's real, what's not real, etc. But also you've given us rationality, right? We use reason, we use logic, etc. Right? But those two are not enough, right? To know what is real and what is required for us to become the type of people that Allah wants us to become. So that's what Allah gave us revelation. He gave us the Quran. The Quran, or Ramadan, is a celebration of the revelation of the Quran.
Yes.
Right. The celebration of guidance. Right. And we truly benefit from that guidance when we are actually
trying to become better people. We're trying to let go of vice, right? Again, a bad act is one thing. Vice is when you want to do bad things, even when you don't have the opportunity to do so, right? So more virtuous, less vicious people. This is what Ramadan is all about. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like I said, he created this previous khulafa. And so through this particular manner, he gives us the tools necessary to be the best that we can be, to be the shuhada ala nasi, as the Quran says, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ وَيَكُونَ الرَّسُولُ عَلَيْكُمْ شَهِيدًا. And thus we made you a just nation, a moderate nation, a justly balanced nation, in order for you to be witnesses over humanity, and that the messenger shall be a witness over you. Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas. You are the best ummah brought out for humanity. Ta'muruna bil ma'ruf wa tanhauna 'anil munkar wa tu'minuna billah. You enjoy what is good, you forbid what is wrong, and you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So Muslims have an enormous responsibility, right? And so going into the fast is really, I like to say, is about self-mastery. Fasting teaches us a way to master ourselves. And so I typically, like when I fast in Ramadan, what I try to avoid is, one, I try to lessen the amount of things that I look at. Like, for instance, movies. I don't go to the movies on Ramadan. I don't watch movies on TV during Ramadan. Right. I try to speak less, right? At least unless it's necessary. That's another thing I try to do. I would recommend too, like for Muslims that during this month, you challenge yourself. You challenge yourself. Try not to eat unless you're hungry, right? Because there's a tendency to try to make up for what you missed during the day. That once you eat that, you break your fast, and then once you feel full, that's it, right? And actually they say that you should actually, even when you don't feel full yet, you should sort of like take a break and give yourself about maybe 15, 20 minutes. But then your brain will catch up with your stomach, right? And make you realize, okay, I've had enough, right? So of course, in addition to that being a sign that you have control over your stomach, it has health benefits too, right? The less you eat, the better it is for your health. And a lot of people, especially Black folks, I mean, we have diabetes, we have hypertension, we have cholesterol problems. Drink more water. Try not to get away from the sugary, things, like of course cakes and ice cream and sodas and those type of things. So there are things, of course, their eyes, our ears. We try not to listen to things that are bad. Try not to look at things that are bad. We try to control our tongues, control our stomachs. We try not to go places that will put us in harm's way. So we should set goals for ourselves during this time. Challenge ourselves a bit. We should, in my opinion, say to ourselves that the older I get, the more virtuous I should become. Right. So if I'm just as pious as I was last year, as opposed to being more pious, right, this year, then that's a problem in my view, that we should be constantly growing. We're growing in our knowledge, growing in our spirituality, right? And we definitely want to take every opportunity to read as much as the Quran as possible. So if we shut down, with the less time we spend on social media, we spend on television or cable or going to the movies, we fill it in with more reading of the Quran, more learning of the Arabic language, etc. I mean, there's just so much that we can do, and I hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses all of us to achieve some of those things during this month and beyond, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you, Doctor. So Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali, it has been a pleasure to have you with us today. Again, everyone remember, talking with teachers, go to the Lamppost Initiative, Lamppost Education Initiative page. The link is in the description. Don't forget to check out the books, the articles as well. Our beloved doctor, he's done a lot to advance Islamic knowledge, and we should always be in the spirit of supporting those who are working in the cause of God to advance our life. Good doctor, we thank you. Inshallah, this won't be the last time we'll have you with us. Next time I'm going to have a list of controversial subjects.
Inshallah. Imam Rashad, it's been a pleasure. And
Yes,
definitely anytime, really do appreciate it. And I really do respect your work. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you success in all that you do.
Ameen. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.